And two things that I got throughout this week was my beard's definitely coming in pretty good. And this part of the book completely changed my perspective on this. Like Ted by Carmine Gallo, which is a book on the 9 public speaking secrets of the world's top minds. And the book is kind of centered around TED Talks itself, depicting them. He reviews all of them and pulls out the best public speaking tips from them. But the book goes much farther, much more beyond that, and really gets into just the art of presenting and public speaking altogether. TED Talk started in early 2000s as just a one-time event, which quickly gained more and more popularity, and it became a kind of a global event from there with independent TEDx all around the world. And Carmine starts with basically coming out and saying that, yes, the book is written after these TED Talks and it uses TED Talks as a example throughout the book, but it goes much more beyond that. And you can use the principles taught in this book in your work life, in any role that you need to present, whether you're in, it's for your job or a college student, or you're giving these virtual presentations. You need to be able to know how to present. And Carmine breaks public speaking and TED Talks into 3 separate groups. The first being emotional, the second being novel, and the third being memorable. And so the first part of the book is emotional, and he starts the first chapter off titled Unleash the Master Within. And this deals with the first notion of passion. And if you are not passionate about what you're speaking, that comes off quite a bit. And I see this with in work quite often, because people are presenting on things that they might not feel passionate about. And it's unbelievably boring. It's brutal to sit through a presentation, a meeting where someone is basically talking off a slideshow, just monotone. They don't care, and they don't care if you care, kind of a thing. And that's the first kind of principle in this book, is you need to be passionate, because passion comes off. It kind of drives conversation. It gives off, more emotion. That charisma is definitely contagious. And if you're passionate about what you're speaking on, it's never going to be a dull moment for yourself or your audience. Because if you're not inspired yourself, there's no way you can inspire others to take action. So if you're a manager or a boss of some sort and you have tasks that need to get done by your employees, they're not going to be inspired to do it if, you come to work on Monday and you're like, oh, I hate Mondays, right? You're that person coming to the office where it's just not going to inspire anyone. You need to have some sort of, passion for your topic that you're going to be presenting on, else nothing's going to get done. And what's really important is to identify what your passion is. I think that sometimes when people say, find your passion or what's your passion, it kind of comes off as something you should just know, right? Everyone knows what they're passionate about and you should just rattle it off. But I think it's something that actually takes work, right? You need to see what you like, see what you don't like, and kind of find what your passion is through a series of tests to come out with what that is. Tony Hirsch is an example in the book that Gallo gives, where he's the CEO of Zappos, which is an online shoe company. But his passion isn't shoes. It's delivering excellent customer service, making sure that everyone, employees and customers, are happy with what they're doing. And that's what he does. And Gallo comes up with this notion of, instead of asking what your passion is, what you should be asking is, what makes your heart sing? It's just kind of another way to phrase that question that has a little bit more emotion and a little bit more feeling behind it. And after this section of the book, I kind of wanted to think, what makes my heart sing? What's my passion? And I'm, just a young kid trying to do what I can do about anything. And, I've found things that I liked. I found things that I don't like. But what I'm really just pursuing right now primarily this video series is, just to learn. I want to learn more about videography, more about online content. And I want to learn through the books that I read, but I also want to learn by what I'm doing. And so as far as like what makes my heart sing at the moment, it's learning about this online world of YouTube. And to wrap this chapter up, Gallo goes through, driving home the point that passion gives off charisma. And if you have charisma, that is something that cannot be faked, no matter how hard you try. If there's charisma coming out of a person, it's contagious, and People like to be around people that are charismatic. It's much more persuasive than not having any. And if you truly want to inspire people within any given presentation, you need to have a passion for what you're talking about. Chapter number 2 is master the art of storytelling. So stories kind of help the audience connect more with the speaker or the presenter. When a good presenter is telling a story, they should be able to almost make the listeners forget that they're listening to a presentation. They should be kind of immersed in the story. Brene Brown gave a TED Talk, and she's kind of known in the world of leadership and inspiration. And one of her quotes was that stories are data with a soul, right? Because most of us are in some sort of profession where we need to give off statistics, a lot of data. What are the numbers? That's what you're presenting. But numbers are boring. Numbers are numbers. There's no feeling behind those numbers. But what stories do is it gives numbers context for one, and it also helps the listener listen. Because no matter how important the numbers are, I mean, if you're not completely engaged with what you're listening to, it's hard to remember anything after a presentation like that. And so then Gallo gets a little bit more technical with some of TED Talks themselves. So he broke down, a handful of TED Talks into kind of what makes a TED Talk great. And he brings up Aristotle's kind of this notion of ethos, which deals with credibility, logos, which is logic, that's the data and the numbers, and pathos, which deals with your emotions. And when he was kind of depicting these TED Talks, he came up with a few numbers, and in the area of ethos, so this was kind of credibility, that takes up about 10% of a TED Talk. Logos is about 25%, so that's the numbers and the data. And then 65% was all touching on emotions. And that's where stories really come into play. That's whatever the TED Talk or the presentation is on, a majority of it is going to be trying to connect with your audience so that they remember and they are inspired after your presentation. And the 3 types of stories that Gallo depicts in the chapter are personal stories. So these are stories, that you've experienced and you can tell you've learned something from them, thought something was humorous, whatever it may be to connect. Another type is stories from others. These you should have a lot more of if you hear other people telling a story and you learn something from it. And then the third is stories about products or ideas that have failed or succeeded, because oftentimes those can be used as concrete examples that people are interested in listening to. And to finish this chapter up, Gallo talks about, being really honest with your stories. A lot of the times it's almost, it's uncomfortable, or you don't think that maybe a personal experience you've had relates. But if that story at all drives your passion for the topic, sharing it, I mean, it's a must. And it's going to come off as authentic, which can't be faked. And authenticity really goes a long way with an audience, because if they don't think you're authentic, then, I mean, what are you? You're, just some scumbag up there talking. They're not going to listen to anything. But if they think you're authentic and you really mean what you're saying, that's going to inspire people. And that's how Gallo finishes this chapter. Chapter 3 is having a conversation. And Gallo starts this chapter off with this idea of rapport being essential into building trust. Right? If you meet someone for the first time, you're not necessarily going to trust them until you have some sort of conversation and some kind of rapport builds. And one important part to building this rapport is being authentic. And again, authenticity doesn't just happen. It's a lot like your passion. You need to work in order to get your passion. You need to learn how to be more authentic. And it's something that you can work on and practice, learn more about every day. I find it with these videos as well as, it's a lot like public speaking, where you almost feel like you need to be something you're not. Whereas the more you are you, the better it's going to come off. So that's something that I work on with these videos week to week. And hopefully something that I'm getting better at, but it's something that is absolutely essential, because if you're not being authentic, that is going to come across sooner or later that you're just a fraud. And one big thing, especially with public speaking, is nerves get in the way so quickly. And being nervous is definitely going to make you, look like you're a different person than you actually are. So it takes time to get, past those nerves and work out some of the early kinks with anything, but a lot with public speaking in order to get good at it, in order to be authentic. I like to think of Gary Vee, which is kind of a entrepreneur, inspirational guy who does all this video content, all this online content. And if you look at his videos now, you're going to see like, oh my God, this guy was a natural. He's, great at it. He's perfect. He could be, the standard of online video making. But if you look at some of his first videos, it's like a completely different person, right? For everything from his personality's dimmer, his, camera quality's not great, the angles, the lighting, everything. It's like he's completely different now than he was then. And it's all just from learning how to be more and more authentic. Part 2 of this book is titled Novel. So this deals with uniqueness of your presentations. And the first chapter is titled Teach Me Something New. So good novelty, good uniqueness in a presentation can literally change someone's whole entire perspective on life. This can be anything from, brand new ideas that come about to even new ways to look at kind of old things that we've, been doing for centuries. Like to think of this as kind of like the life hack videos that you see online. They're easy little things that help with kind of the monotony of things you've done all along. And then Gallo goes into kind of the chemistry of the brain with remembering presentations that we hear. And one of the key ingredients, it's kind of like our brain's save button, is dopamine. And dopamine is triggered whenever we get something good or rewarding. We get that hit of dopamine, which actually helps us remember the situations and when they came about. When we're trying to learn or remember things, I think of like, really boring work meetings where we need to know the information, but it's slow, it's monotone, it's not enjoyable whatsoever. It's a lot harder to remember the content of those presentations than it is of any, TED Talk that I've watched or any inspirational, meeting or presentation that I've been to. I get a lot more out of simply because there's being dopamine triggered with kind of stimulating presentations that I've seen. And one of the sections in this chapter was kind of dealt with being an introvert and how important that is. That one of the quotes within the book was that there's a big difference between having the best ideas and being able to say an idea, right? So this deals with introverts having this need to communicate better with their ideas. I'm very, very introverted, and this is something that really stuck with me and something that I've learned kind of over the past probably 3 years of my life, where if you work on that communicating aspect, getting your ideas out is a lot easier and it's a lot more inspiring when you do. And one of the easiest ways to novelty, to get more perspectives on old ideas, is to bombard your brain with new experiences. Travel more, put yourself in uncomfortable positions, because it's going to create new pathways throughout your brain that can actually help you deliver content and material in a new way. It gives you a new perspective, which helps create and inspire other people to see things from a new perspective. The last part of this chapter was titled Create a Twitter Friendly Headline. So this deals with making sure that the very start, what everyone sees at the very beginning of your presentation is going to be the title, and it needs to be concise and it needs to be intriguing. One of the examples in the book was when you're getting attacked by a lion, you don't ask, how many teeth does it have? You ask, is the thing going to eat me? And this deals with, you don't need to know the nitty gritty details of it right away. You just want something catchy, something that's going to get people intrigued about your presentation. The second chapter of this part is titled Create Jaw-Dropping Experiences. And this deals with the brain's notion that it remembers emotions or feelings of a event rather than the material of the event itself. And this was demonstrated very well with Bill Gates' TED Talk on malaria, where he actually delivered or exposed like a handful of mosquitoes out into the crowd. And it's something that's been remembered forever. He simply could have said, mosquitoes transmit this and that we need to, cure it, or however he might go about it. But having mosquitoes there, opening it up into the audience, created a jaw-dropping moment that's been talked about ever since. And it's always important to remember we're creatures of emotion. We're not creatures of logic. Whether you're in accounting or finance or anything that deals with numbers where you need to present numbers, this would be good for, anytime you have to make a meeting where you have to really deliver number content, it needs to be somehow or another tied to emotion, because what's going to be remembered is not the 150 numbers you rattle off to a person. It's going to be how you made them feel throughout the presentation. And it's those things that stick in their mind that's going to help them remember all the other content of the presentation. My light went out. There we are. And two things that I got throughout this week was my beard's definitely coming in pretty good. And this part of the book completely changed my perspective on this. Numbers need to have emotions tied to them. That's what I've kind of realized with a lot of the meetings that I go to, and why they're not exciting. They're nothing I really remember, is because there's no emotion being delivered. They're not giving me anything to really remember. It's just rattling off numbers. And the more numbers you have, the harder it is to remember anything. So tying emotion behind numbers is going to be huge in delivering better and more effective presentations. And the third chapter of the second part is titled Lighten Up. And this has to deal with just, loosening up, loosen the tie a little bit, have some humor within your presentations, because people like humor. People like people that are funny. Too much humor, though, it can be, detrimental to the topic or whatever you're trying to deliver. So you do want to be mindful of that. But natural, jokes, natural observations that are humorous can be hugely effective within any presentation. So Gallo kind of outlines a few easy ways to be funny. And these are through the use of personal stories. So the chances are that you've experienced something that you think is funny. Other people generally will as well. The second being quotes. So these are quotes that other people have used. Let other people be funny for you, and you can get a laugh out that way. Analogies are a really good way to deliver, humor within a presentation. Comparing two things that shouldn't be compared, but you can find that, can definitely be humorous. Oh, videos. So any video, that's an easy way, because, funny cat videos, they go a long way. And then photos as well. Easy ways to be funny that if you don't think you can put it in your presentation, using someone else's content to do so is completely cool, as long as it's can be tied back to the topic at hand. It's important to remember that humor can kind of turn walls into windows. It can help people see things from a new perspective, helps build trust. Because again, people like people that are funny. And they're willing to listen to people if there's a little bit of that entertainment value behind them, to give it that kind of that extra moment to remember them by. The third and final part of the book is memorable. So this deals with how to make your presentation, how to make your talks better and more memorable. The first chapter is stick to the 18-minute rule. So this is important because when you're passionate about anything, it's easy to talk about it forever because you like it. It takes a lot of discipline to narrow that down into any time frame, specifically 18 minutes. It takes discipline. It takes hard work to craft something effective within that window. And it's also about as long as most people's coffee breaks. So if you're creating online content, it's something you want to kind of aim for. And another piece about this is that, listening is hard. There's studies that show that after about the 20-minute mark, anxiety levels, they go higher and higher the longer you go, because if you're trying to remember something, the more information that's thrown at you, the harder and harder it becomes to remember that. Because when we listen, we kind of create a cognitive backlog that we're trying to remember things. And the more and more things that go onto that backlog, the harder it is to remember for later on. And there's kind of a notion that the brain likes to remember like a maximum of 3 things. Anything shorter than that, so if you're going to teach 2 separate, main points, it's definitely easier to remember, but it's not that much easier to remember than it is to remember 3. But when you go to 4 main points, that's actually increasingly harder, kind of exponentially. If you add a 5th thing, it's even way harder than it is to remember, 4 would be. So it's important, try to stick to 3 main points within your presentation and always connect stories to them to make them more memorable. The second chapter of the third part is titled Paint a Mental Picture with Multi-Sensory Experiences. So when you actually demonstrate what you're talking about, it adds incredible value. It's like the use of hand gestures in speeches, but times like 100,000, right? So if you're talking about dirt bikes, and you have a dirt bike on stage, people are going to remember that a lot more because they can see it, they can visualize it, and it adds like another layer of context to what you're talking about. And then he brings up the notion that PowerPoint is dead. And this is something that I know I've heard outside of this book in particularly, but it's really important to remember, like, all the presentations that I have seen at work are PowerPoint driven, especially in the virtual, world that we live in. Seeing a slide with just a handful of bullet points is nothing memorable. I've seen it all throughout college, all throughout my working career. And it's something that it pops up and a piece of me dies. It's harder to listen to. If you watch any TED Talk and you see anyone with a slideshow, you're going to see a lot of pictures and you're going to see maybe a few slides with, one sentence on them. And it's not necessarily to, remind the speaker to hit on this point, this point, and this point, but it's just to drive home what the point is. One quote on the screen. It goes a lot farther than just having a list of the things you're talking about. Because let's face it, I mean, if you have a presentation, you don't want the PowerPoint to be the main entree. The speaker is supposed to be. That's just supposed to be kind of that side dish. Might be your peas. No one really likes peas. We don't want to see peas. Make your PowerPoint into the side of mashed potatoes. It's very complimentary to the main entree, which is yourself. And to break the habit of using PowerPoint like it's always been used takes a lot of courage, right? If everyone's doing it, to break out of that is not easy. And it might kind of feel silly when you do some of the things you do for the first time. But if people really remember what you're talking about more than what everyone else talks about, you're going to go a lot farther in the long run than anyone else would by just doing kind of what we've been doing. And the third and final chapter is titled Stay in Your Lane. And this really just deals with that topic of being authentic. And I think it's a great way to finish up the book because with speaking and presenting, it's really easy to, like, completely snap out of it, be a completely different person presenting because of nerves, because you're, a little bit anxious about speaking to, a group of people or even an auditorium of people. It's important to practice and learn from what you're doing. Try to be as conscious as possible while you're presenting to really understand what you can work on and get better at. Take this series as an example. I think I'm a little bit more authentic now than I was at the beginning, and I hope I keep trending more and more towards just being who I am, at home as I am on camera. It's something that it's hard to do. But the more I do it, the more I try to come through as authentic as I can possibly be, because it's a lot easier to be authentic than it is to, be a phony. Try to be someone you're not, trying to be something you're not. You see a handful of people speak and present different ways, and you're like, I want to be like them. Just be yourself, because the more you learn from being yourself, the more people are going to remember you, the more people are going to remember your topics and the speeches that you do. And that sums it up. Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo. Again, this book I would recommend to anyone late high school and up if you ever plan on presenting, because this is going to give you kind of fundamentals to make your presentation pop a little bit more. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Always remember to like and subscribe, as well as leave a book that you want to see me do next. Thank you guys for watching.